Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 227, and we're going to talk about value add or adding value in education memories from my university days. So, I was meeting our church's cemetery agent, the person who handles all of our plots at the cemetery. And it came out towards the end of the meeting that although I teach now at a middle school, that I used to teach at a university full time for 18 years, right? And so she was kind of surprised about that, right? That I taught there for so long. And so why did I leave? And I said, no, I wasn't left. I didn't leave. I didn't, I was, my contract wasn't renewed. And so I'm in arbitration, which is why I'm subjective professor. I don't say my name, just in case. You never know. And so the conversation drifted into politics, primarily because I used to teach race theory, and that came up. So I walked into her office as a pastor who teaches at a middle school, but then it became this interesting sort of college seminar type thing. She outed herself as a left-wing Jewish feminist, right? Which might have been an interesting conversation, maybe sort of, cause someone to not say a whole lot from that point. But she kept going, right? I imagine that she had a run-in with maybe Gaza protesters, perhaps, pro-peace people, maybe. Maybe she ran into these people at her synagogue. Maybe they came to the cemetery itself because the cemetery is half for Jews and the other half is non-Jew, right? But everyone who works at the office, it seemed, were Jewish. Anyway, so I came out of the office, and it was a fun conversation. At least for me, it was. She was venting a lot, and I just was like, yeah, 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 keep it coming, you know? It was really kind of interesting. I'm hoping it was cathartic for her, like she was able to release a lot of pent-up frustration. And, I got to an opportunity to basically say, yeah, everyone has their opinion, but it all comes down to justice, right? Avoiding hypocrisy. And she seemed to really enjoy that. But we're running out of time, so I left at that point. And so it reminded me of a lot of the situations in the classroom down in the university, how I would present the unexpected in a very unexpected kind of way. And if you've been listening to the podcast, maybe you're like, well, this is not unexpected. This is exactly what I expected, probably because you have that subjectivity already. And maybe by sharing some of my own experiences, you'd be able to maybe craft or at least improve some of the conversation techniques that you have with people who are still living in ignorance of just how bad things are in the world. Okay. So when I set out to teach, right, 18, well, actually it was I taught my first college level class back in 1997. I was part-time, taught occasionally, but I learned a lot of lessons. So by the time I got my contract, my first contract in 2005, I pretty much I had a good rhythm, right? So I had a good way of teaching. Students were responding really well. And, it began to solidify around 2005. And so the goal was to teach something new, something different, shake their perspectives up a little bit to get them to learn something new. Because most people, particularly younger you are, you think you already know everything. And so you generally tend to tune out, not listen, say, oh, here we go again, kind of attitude. So I wanted to somehow shake them up so that they would be interested enough to learn, right? To aspire for more. How was I going to add value to their education? Because as I said, it's a required class. Most people say, oh, here we go. This has nothing to do with my major. It's not important. I don't learn anything here. And so knowing that, that's what pretty much everyone is thinking. How do I get them to realize that they can have a lot of value by showing up to class every day? So I was able to hook a lot of students by being pretty different, openly different, right? So in a world where, and you saw the episode I did earlier, where the Democrat to Republican ratio was sometimes 70 to 1, in certain departments or in certain universities. Sometimes some universities have zero registered Republicans, and then I would say, but I'm an anarcho-capitalist, so I don't even show up on that metric, and which was kind of funny for a lot of the students, and that I was a fanatical Christian, right? So knowing that's how I started day one, you'd be interested to know that for a time I used to have a 5 out of 5 rating on my ratemyprofessors.com. And it was so, I was just, it made me feel so awkward because usually a 5 out of 5 rating on Rate My Professors meant that you were easy, all right? You were an easy A, and I didn't want that kind of student. So I begged some of the students that I said, if you hated my class, you're obligated to go on there and give me a bad rating to bring it down from the 5. And a couple of students obliged me with that. But generally, I only get like 2 or 3 per semester out of what, like 120 students. So that's not too bad, right? So my approach was, okay, so after I introduced myself, I said, the point is not just to learn the book. A lot of my colleagues, they love the books and they taught the book as the book. Like, this is so important for you. These are, look how beautiful the writing is, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But, my thing was it's not just the book, right? But each book is an example of knowledge production. And I went over that in like episode 1 or 2. But an example of information produced from a person who has a very specific subjectivity perspective, right? And so people wrote what we're reading for a reason, right? They had something to say. They wanted to tell us something, some truth from their subjectivity, from their perspective. All of these writers, no matter when they lived, whether what we're reading is considered mythical or allegorical, it doesn't matter. These are all human beings. And as human beings, they have similar experiences to us. The context might be different, the value systems might be slightly different, right? But the themes are always going to be the same. Themes of coming of age, the search for meaning, understanding death and life, rights, equality, justice. I mean, these are all the things that we're wrestling with today. And so the way that I would teach the class is say, so this is this person's understanding of this concept, of that concept, right? And so do these books teach us anything which could help us out today? What are the lessons? What are the applications? What are the pitfalls? What are the negative aspects of this perspective that we are reading? In other words, I I tried not to, and I emphasize them. You can't cherry pick parts that you like, right? Like I hated this whole book, but here's this one line on page 230 that I liked. And so I'm going to cherish that single line. And I said, no, you can't cherry pick things like that because in a book, right, particularly the books that were chosen, to be taught in a class, um, it's a system, right? It's a package. And so all of the parts in that package, they fit together, right? Uh, and if you just cherry pick things from all these different books, saying, well, I like this, I like that, you will end up contradicting yourself. And I did a episode on eating your own, right? You can only maintain a certain level of superficiality, right? A very, trivial understanding of things for only so long, because when life hits you, now you have to start thinking things more deeper level. And then you realize sometimes some of the problems that you have is because you have contradictory beliefs. And so you got to root them out. You have to sort of figure out that they exist and then figure out what to do next, right? And so I would always say that it's not about whose idea you're going to adopt as your own. It's about making something unique for you, right? For the student, right? That's true empowerment. Empowerment is not doing what someone told you to do. Like your professor said, oh, we got to protest for this. That's empowerment. No, it's not. It's empowerment for whoever's idea you are doing, right? Who started it all? Maybe the professor has a local chapter of that protest movement, whatever. And so protesting, engaging in that kind of activity benefits that person, doesn't benefit you. And so I would always try to get the students to realize that that's the game that everyone's playing. By engaging in politics, the act of persuasion, that's how I define it, by persuading everyone to see things from their perspective, you are subjugating, you are suppressing your subjectivity and pretending that you're living in someone else's subjectivity. Don't do that. It's just not, that's not empowerment. You are empowering somebody else. So by looking and understanding what you are seeing in the world and the life that you are living, now you come up with information. You come up with choices that work best for the student, for you. Right. And so I would even tell them, look, so we're going to analyze all this stuff, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. Why would I do that? I mean, that's what everyone else is doing. I know what I'm going to do. The challenge as a teacher is to help students be able to figure out what they need to do in their life. Right. And so I told them, I said, if you do everything I tell you to do, that's weird because then you are a middle-aged or now older aged Korean dude, right? Why would you try to pretend you're a Korean person, right? Particularly an old Korean person. You don't want to do that. You want to be you, right? So using my own terminology, I would say be your own knowledge producer because it's the knowledge producer, the one who makes the information who benefits the most because it's their perspective. And so when a professor writes a book, yeah, that's their perspective. If you agree with it, yeah, you're empowering the person who wrote the book, right? It's no benefit, it's very little benefit to you, right? You might like little bits and pieces, but how does that fit in your life? It generally doesn't, right? People are just, you know, taking on certain beliefs because they believe that if they virtue signal this way, that it'll mean something for them. But it has very little benefit to the actual person's life. That's why a lot of the people who engage in this kind of stuff are generally well off, right? They can afford to dabble in wasting their life, right? Because their family will have their back. But most lower income people, they can't afford this, right? So if they do engage in some kind of protest, they're going to ask you, is this paid? Are you going to pay me? And of course, right on cue, a lot of the people that show up at these Kamala Harris, what do you call it, rallies are paid to be there, right? They're bussed in, right? That's their job, right? To appear on stage, appear to be excited, and so it looks like a lot of people support her, right? So don't be living your life with someone else's subjectivity, right? Make knowledge from your perspective and then live that life. And in order to get there, I would teach them deconstruction. And I went over that in the early episodes. Maybe one day in the future, maybe after another year, I'll go over the deconstruction process again. But you can go back and listen to them now with the less audio, with a microphone not as good as this one. And so I would teach each uh, item of literature that we would read as a closed system, right? So let's say, for example, Gilgamesh, right? A lot of people, when they teach Gilgamesh, right, they got a lot of baggage they're bringing with them. And so they forget the story itself, right? They're so busy falling over themselves to get to the flood narrative and say, ooh, look, see, scripture Hebrew scripture plagiarized the story from the story of Gilgamesh, right? They're so eager to get to that bit that they forget the rest of the story, right? And so what you have to do is you have to look at each work and as a closed system, right? Before you make any other application. And so you have to say, is it consistent internally or is it inconsistent internally? It's sort of like plot holes. If you watch a movie and you're like, oh, look, if Lord of the Rings, if they rode the eagles, they could just drop the ring in the mountain in the first episode of the trilogy. Something like that, like a plot hole, something that doesn't really work. Uh, then the book itself, turns into a bad argument, right? So is it a good argument or is it a bad argument? You have to look at that at its face, right? Yeah, and a lot of people who get stuck on, oh, it's an old book, no one cares anymore. Well, then you won't see that it has themes of coming of age, wrestling with the issues of immortality and death, right? And these are similar issues that people still wrestle with today. Trust me, whenever I do a funeral, people are thinking about life and death. So it's not about I like the book or I don't like the book, especially people will say that based on their own prejudice, right? They are predisposed to not like certain things. And as a scholar, as a college student, right, you have to at least be able to get through a work, a piece of literature, a reading that you don't like so that you can critique it, right? And maybe you're going to change your opinion of it. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about good or bad, right? It's about teaching people the logical conclusion of their own subjectivity, right? So here we have an example of how someone saw something, how he understood it, and then tried to make sense of it, okay? And you can see that process. They laid it all out for us to be able to read. And so in the same way, then you should be able to analyze yourself a little bit better. Most people can't do it perfectly because, right, we're blind to our own subjectivity. Our own subjectivity is neutral to us, right? But I strongly encourage people don't excerpt it, right? Don't say, well, I like this chapter or I like this line. See, that's how people get duped. That's how people are tricked into not really being serious about self-analysis, about looking at their own subjectivity and where that subjectivity will lead them, right? It's about seeing how all of the parts of a piece of literature work together or how they don't, right? What's the agenda? What is the goal of the piece of literature, right? And that will reveal to you generally the author's vision. But it's not your life, it's someone else's life. You get to be a voyeur, kind of, right? You get to look at how someone decided they were going to live their life. I mean, they explained it all in this book. And so then you get to pick it apart and you say, oh, so that's why they have these kinds of issues in their life, because this is the way they understood certain things when in reality was something completely different. So you see, I hope that conveys a little bit of what I was doing in the classroom. And then early on in the semester, I would say, yeah, this is a humanities class, and a lot of you science geeks, artists or whatever, music department students, you're going to say, what does this have to do with me? My whole career will not be reading books. It'll be doing experiments and research and whatnot. And so that's why I gave them, I would show them the images of the shadow sculpture or magic sculpture. And I talked about it very early on, like episode 1 or 2 or 3. But it's a shadow sculpture project where, oh, and if you're listening to this on, Spotify or something like that, then you won't see the images. But if you go to JV, V as in Victor, JV Muntean, Muntean. So JV muntean.com, you'll get to his site. I just went there and the links seem to be broken. Hopefully it's a temporary thing, but there's a contact link so you can email him. But he's a sculptor and he creates these really interesting sculptures. When you look at it, you have no idea what you're looking at. And the one particular sculpture I picked out was Singing in the Rain, Singing in the Rain. But when you look at it, it's just like it's a cube with lots of cutouts in it. And so I would say, if this was a religion department, what are the questions that we are asking while we're looking at this? How do we come to understand this object in the religion department? And students would say, yeah, well, what does it mean? What did it symbolize? What function did it have in society to give people loyalty, meaning, etc.? And then I said, okay, that's cool. So let's take the same object, but now we change the class. Presto, changeo. We're now sitting in a physics class. Same object, what are the questions you're going to ask? And so everyone was like, oh, how long is it? How high is it? How length, width, height, right? How dense is it? What's the material? What does it weigh? These are the questions that you're asking about the very same object. Now, I posited a situation. Let's say both classes, the physics class and the religion class, wrote papers. How long would it take you for you to realize that you're studying the same object, right? The reports would be very different, right? Without a picture, right? You're just describing it with words. It would take a little bit for people to realize that they're talking about the same object. Okay. So the same object, when viewed from a different perspective, yields something completely different. All right. And then I said, on top of that, no one has even come close to understanding what the actual object is, which is a shadow sculpture that if you shine light on it in a very particular angle, it will cast a very particular shadow. But when you rotate the object, right, it'll cast a different shadow. So there are three different shadows in this single sculpture. It's very cool. You should take a look at it if you haven't already. So what am I trying to say? What was the point of that object? You can look at something forever and never really understand it. Maybe in order to attempt to understand something, you have to do something radically different, right? So it's not about the department. It's not about the scientific method or whatever that you think is the end all be all of all methods of understanding and coming to terms with something. No, it's about understanding that everything is a matter of perspective. And so if you get stuck, if you see something as a problem, maybe the problem only exists because of your subjectivity, because of your perspective. Shift your perspective a little bit, and all of a sudden the problem disappears, right? The example I gave a long time ago was in church, if there was a topic that came up, it's a pretty awkward to say to talk about in Korean, right? Especially given all the cultural faux pas and etiquette, whatever's. So we would just switch to English, and there, all of that baggage, cultural baggage, doesn't exist. And so once we are done talking about that topic, you generally it's about sex or something like that, right? And when we're done talking about the subject, then we go back to speaking in Korean, right? And so this is just one of the simplest ways you can show people that what is a problem is only a problem within a certain subjectivity. And so any department that you're studying in, you can use this method of subjectivity, shifting subjectivity to overcome any roadblocks that you might have. In fact, you can use this in your own personal life. And so I would make the pitch that this value add that I was trying to give students was protection for themselves. So I would challenge them, deconstruct all your teachers, deconstruct all the sources of information, you know, deconstruct and then choose what you are going to rely on, knowing that you have to bear all risk and responsibility. In other words, no one's going to come and save you. So what are you going to do, right? Be careful about that responsibility. You will be so busy being happy, exploring your solutions that you will leave me alone, right? That's my goal, to teach all of this so that everyone would just leave me alone so I can live my life in the way that I want. And so that's kind of the trip down memory lane that I went through today, and I thought I would share with you. It always kind of made me feel good when students would leave. And keep in mind, this is a very diverse class from all different kinds of political backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, different ages, from the non-traditional older student to the non-traditional younger student. I mean, you got it all, and always had satisfied customers. Sometimes I miss it. Yes, I do. But it is what it is, right? So that's it for today. I will talk to you next time.